The sharp crack of palm against cheek echoed across Maple Grove's pristine sidewalk, like a gunshot. 7-year-old Alex Martinez crumpled to the ground, his red toy car skittering into the gutter as tears streamed down his face. Above him, Patricia Whitmore's perfectly manicured hand still trembled in the afternoon air, her face twisted with rage. "I told you to shut up," she screamed, her voice shrill enough to make the sparrows flee from nearby oak trees. "This is a respectable neighborhood, not some playground for your kind." The security camera mounted on the Hendersons' porch captured every second. The timestamp would later become evidence: 3:47 p.m., Tuesday, October 15th, the moment that would change everything. 3 blocks away, Maria Martinez was finishing her latest video script, unaware that her son's world was shattering. Her YouTube channel, Voices for Change, had grown from a handful of subscribers to 2.3 million in just 2 years. She specialized in advocating for children with special needs, sharing Alex's journey with autism to help other families feel less alone. The irony would not be lost on her later. Alex had always found comfort in routines. Every day after school, he would sit on the sidewalk outside their ranch-style home and spin his red car, watching the wheels blur into perfect circles. The repetitive motion calmed his mind, drowning out the overwhelming sensory input that made the world feel too bright, too loud, too much. His humming accompanied the ritual, a soft, melodic sound that helped him process the day's experiences. The Maple Grove Homeowners Association had been Patricia Whitmore's domain for 8 years. She ruled with an iron fist, wrapped in pastel cardigans and fake smiles, enforcing regulations that grew more arbitrary with each monthly meeting. Grass height measured to the millimeter. Paint colors approved only from her personal palette. Even the type of flowers planted in front yards required committee approval. But children made noise. Children disrupted her vision of suburban perfection. And Alex, with his daily ritual and gentle humming, had become her personal obsession. The complaints started small. A formal letter in the Martinez family's mailbox about excessive noise disturbing the peace. A citation for loitering on public sidewalks beyond reasonable time limits. Maria had tried reasoning with Patricia, explaining Alex's autism, his need for routine and sensory regulation. Patricia's response had been swift and cruel. "I don't care what's wrong with him. This isn't a treatment facility. It's a residential community with standards." On that Tuesday afternoon, Alex had been spinning his car for exactly 17 minutes when Patricia's white Lexus pulled into her driveway across the street. She slammed the door hard enough to make Alex flinch, his sensitive hearing picking up the harsh metallic sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. But he continued his ritual, humming a little louder to block out the disturbance. Patricia stormed across the street, her designer heels clicking angrily against the asphalt. Her blonde hair was pulled back so tightly it stretched her face into a perpetual expression of disapproval. At 52, she had never married, never had children, and seemed to view anyone under 18 as a personal affront to her existence. "Didn't I tell you to stop that infernal noise?" she demanded, standing over Alex like a vulture. "You're disturbing everyone in the neighborhood with your weird sounds." Alex looked up at her with confused brown eyes. He didn't understand why the nice lady was so angry. His mother had always told him that his humming was beautiful, that it was just his way of communicating with the world. He held up his red car hopefully, thinking maybe she wanted to see how perfectly it spun. "Car goes round," he said quietly, his speech still developing at 7 years old. "Pretty circles. Make me happy." The innocence in his voice seemed to infuriate Patricia even more. Her face flushed purple, veins standing out on her neck like twisted ropes. "I don't care what makes you happy. This is my neighborhood, and I won't have some retarded freak disrupting. The slap came without warning. Patricia's open palm connected with Alex's left cheek, with enough force to knock him sideways. The 7-year-old hit the concrete hard, scraping his palms as he tried to break his fall. His red car bounced twice before settling in the gutter, one wheel now bent at an odd angle. For a moment, the world went completely silent. Even the autumn wind seemed to hold its breath. Then, Alex began to cry. Not the normal tears of a hurt child, but the deep, anguished wails of someone whose safe space had been violently invaded. The sound was heartbreaking, primitive, a cry that seemed to come from his very soul. Mrs. Henderson, who had been watering her garden, dropped her hose and rushed toward them. "Patricia, what have you done?" But Patricia wasn't finished. She grabbed Alex by his shirt collar and hauled him to his feet, her fingers digging into his small shoulders hard enough to leave bruises. "Maybe now you'll learn to be quiet like a normal person," she hissed, shaking him roughly. "No more noise. No more sitting here bothering decent people. Do you understand me?" Alex's cries intensified, his body going rigid with sensory overload. This was what his mother called a meltdown when the world became too overwhelming, and his nervous system simply shut down. He couldn't speak, couldn't think, could only feel the crushing weight of fear and confusion. Other neighbors began emerging from their homes. The Hendersons, the Johnsons, elderly Mr. Patel from the corner house. They had all watched Alex grow up, had seen his gentle nature and quiet routines. Several children who had been playing in nearby yards came running at the sound of his distress, only to stop short when they saw Patricia's furious face. "All of you, go home," Patricia shouted at the gathering crowd. "This is HOA business. I'm handling a noise violation according to our community standards." 8-year-old Emma Johnson began to cry, frightened by the adult anger and Alex's continued wailing. Her mother, Sarah Johnson, stepped protectively in front of her daughter while pulling out her phone. "I'm calling the police," Sarah announced loudly. "You just assaulted a child." "You'll do no such thing," Patricia snapped, finally releasing Alex, who collapsed back onto the sidewalk. This boy was disturbing the peace. "I have every right to enforce our neighborhood regulations." But Sarah was already dialing 911, her voice shaking with anger as she spoke to the dispatcher. "I need police at 1247 Maple Drive. A woman just attacked a 7-year-old autistic boy. Yes, physically attacked. The child is hurt and crying." Mrs. Henderson knelt beside Alex, trying to comfort him without touching. She knew from Maria that sudden physical contact could make his sensory overload worse. "Sweetheart, you're okay. Your mama will be here soon. You're safe now." Patricia realized the situation was spiraling beyond her control. In her mind, she had been maintaining order, enforcing the standards that made Maple Grove a desirable place to live. The fact that she had just struck a disabled child seemed irrelevant compared to the greater good of the community. "You're all overreacting," she said, smoothing down her hair and adjusting her cardigan as if she hadn't just committed assault. The boy needed discipline. His parents clearly aren't providing it. The sirens arrived within 6 minutes, though it felt like hours to everyone watching Alex's continued distress. Officer Rodriguez and Officer Kim had both responded to domestic calls before, but nothing quite like this. They found a small crowd of neighbors surrounding a crying child, while a well-dressed woman stood nearby, arms crossed, looking annoyed rather than concerned. "What's the situation here?" Officer Rodriguez asked, immediately kneeling to check on Alex. The neighbors began speaking at once, their voices overlapping in urgent explanation. Sarah Johnson stepped forward as the unofficial spokesperson. That woman, she pointed at Patricia, slapped this little boy and grabbed him. Alex is autistic. He was just sitting here playing with his toy car like he does every day. She attacked him for making noise. Patricia scoffed loudly. I was enforcing legitimate noise ordinances. This child has been disrupting our neighborhood for weeks with his constant humming and carrying on. As HOA president, I have the authority. Ma'am, Officer Kim interrupted firmly. You have no authority to put your hands on anyone, especially a child. We're going to need to see some identification. Alex's crying had gradually subsided into exhausted whimpers. Mrs. Henderson had managed to retrieve his red car from the gutter, though one wheel hung at a broken angle. She held it carefully, knowing how important his routines were to his sense of security. Where are his parents? Officer Rodriguez asked gently. His mother works from home, Sarah explained. Someone should go get her. She lives right there, the blue house with the white trim. Mr. Patel shuffled forward, his cane tapping against the concrete. I'll get Maria. She needs to know what happened to her boy. Maria Martinez had been in the middle of editing her latest video about sensory processing techniques when Mr. Patel's urgent knocking interrupted her work. The elderly man's face was pale, his usually steady hands shaking as he gripped his walking stick. Maria, come quickly. Something happened to Alex. The police are here. The words hit her like ice water. Maria's laptop slid off her lap as she bolted upright, her mother's instincts already screaming danger. She ran barefoot across the lawn, her heart hammering against her ribs as she saw the crowd gathered around the sidewalk where Alex spent his afternoons. Her son sat on the concrete, rocking slightly back and forth, a self-soothing behavior she recognized immediately. His left cheek was red and swollen, tears still streaming down his face. The sight of her injured child triggered something primal in Maria, a fury so intense it made her vision narrow to a single point of focus. Alex, baby. What happened? She dropped to her knees beside him, carefully placing her hand on his back in the specific way that usually comforted him. Mama's here. You're safe now. Officer Rodriguez stood respectfully. Are you the boy's mother? Yes. Maria Martinez. What happened to my son? Her voice was steady, but anyone who knew her could hear the barely controlled rage underneath. According to witnesses, this woman struck your son and grabbed him roughly. Officer Kim explained, gesturing toward Patricia. We're investigating a report of child abuse. Maria's eyes found Patricia for the first time, and the HOA president took an involuntary step backward. The fury in Maria's gaze was like staring into a furnace. This was not the polite, diplomatic woman who had attended community meetings and tried to reason with the HOA board. This was a mother whose child had been hurt, and nothing in the world was more dangerous. You put your hands on my baby, Maria said quietly, each word falling like a stone into still water. You hit my son. Patricia lifted her chin defiantly. Your son was creating a public disturbance. As HOA president, I have the responsibility to maintain community standards. Maria stood slowly, her full height still shorter than Patricia, but somehow more commanding. Community standards. Did your community standards tell you to assault a 7-year-old autistic child? Did they tell you to grab a disabled boy hard enough to leave bruises? She pointed to Alex's upper arms, where Patricia's fingers had left red marks that were already darkening. The evidence was undeniable, photographed by Officer Kim's camera and witnessed by half the neighborhood. I want her arrested, Maria continued, her voice growing stronger. "I want her charged with child abuse, assault, and whatever else you can throw at her. And I want it all on record that she attacked a disabled child for the crime of existing in his own neighborhood." Patricia's composure finally cracked. "You can't talk to me like that. Do you have any idea who I am? I've been protecting this neighborhood's property values for 8 years. I've kept the undesirable elements out, maintained our standards." Undesirable elements. Maria's voice rose dangerously. "You mean children. You mean people with disabilities. You mean anyone who doesn't fit your twisted idea of perfection." Officer Rodriguez placed a calming hand on Maria's shoulder. "Ma'am, we understand you're upset. We're handling the situation. Can you tell us what normally happens when your son sits here?" Maria took a deep breath, her journalist training helping her organize her thoughts despite her emotional state. "Alex has autism. Part of his sensory processing involves routine and repetitive behaviors. Every day after school, he sits here and spins his toy car while humming quietly. It helps him decompress from the day. It's completely harmless and well within his rights." She gestured to the gathered neighbors. "Ask anyone here. Alex is the gentlest child you'll ever meet. He doesn't bother anyone, doesn't get in anyone's way. His humming is barely audible from 10 feet away." Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, still holding the broken red car. "That's absolutely true. Officer, Alex is a sweet boy. His little routine never bothered anyone except—" She glanced at Patricia with obvious disgust. "Certain people who seem to think children should be neither seen nor heard." Officer Kim was taking detailed notes, documenting statements from multiple witnesses. The case was becoming clearer by the minute an adult had physically attacked a disabled child for engaging in perfectly legal behavior on a public sidewalk. "Mrs. Whitmore," Officer Rodriguez addressed Patricia formally, "you're under arrest for assault on a minor and child endangerment. You have the right to remain silent." Patricia's face went white as the officer began reading her Miranda rights. This wasn't how the afternoon was supposed to go. In her mind, she had been the victim, forced to take action against a disruptive element that the child's parents refused to control. The idea that she might face criminal charges had never occurred to her. "This is ridiculous," she protested, as Officer Kim produced handcuffs. "I'm a respected member of this community. I'm the HOA president. You can't arrest me for maintaining neighborhood standards." But the metallic click of the cuffs closing around her wrists said otherwise. Patricia Whitmore, who had spent 8 years wielding power over her neighbors' lives, was being led to a police car like a common criminal. The transformation was stark and sudden. Maria had lifted Alex into her arms, holding him close as his crying finally stopped. He was exhausted from the sensory overload, his small body limp against her shoulder. She could feel his heartbeat gradually slowing as her familiar presence helped regulate his nervous system. "Car broken," Alex whispered, his first words since the attack. Maria looked at the bent red toy in Mrs. Henderson's hands and felt her heart crack a little more. It wasn't just a car to Alex. It was security, routine, comfort. Patricia hadn't just hit him. She had destroyed something that helped him navigate a world that often felt too overwhelming to bear. "We'll fix it, baby," Maria whispered into his hair. "Or we'll get you a new one exactly like it. I promise." As the police car pulled away with Patricia in the back seat, the gathered neighbors began to disperse. But the conversation continued in hushed tones on porches and in driveways. Word was already spreading through phone calls and text messages. By evening, everyone in Maple Grove would know what had happened on Maple Drive. That night, After Alex had finally fallen asleep, clutching a temporary replacement car, Maria sat at her computer. Her laptop screen glowed in the darkness of her home office, cursor blinking in an empty document. She had built her platform on advocacy, on giving voice to families like hers who fought daily battles for acceptance and understanding. Now the battle had come to her own front door. She began to type, her fingers moving faster as the words poured out. The story of what happened to Alex would reach far beyond Maple Grove. It would spark conversations in living rooms and boardrooms, in schools and government offices. But first, she needed to tell it truthfully, completely, with all the righteous anger of a mother whose child had been attacked for being different. The video would be titled, "They Hurt My Son When HOA Power Goes Too Far." She would show Alex's bruises, Mrs. Henderson's security footage, the broken toy car. She would name Patricia Whitmore and the Maple Grove HOA. She would demand accountability, justice, and change. Maria had no idea that her video would be viewed 12 million times in the first 48 hours. She couldn't foresee the March for Justice for Alex hashtag trending on social media, or the hundreds of news outlets that would pick up the story. She didn't know that autism advocacy groups across the country would organize protests, or that Patricia Whitmore would become the most hated woman in America. All she knew was that someone had hurt her child, and she would not let it stand. The next morning brought a parade of news vans to Maple Drive. Maria had posted her video at 2 a.m., then tried to get a few hours of sleep before Alex woke up. She made his breakfast as usual, scrambled eggs with cheese cut into precise squares, orange juice in his favorite blue cup, trying to maintain his routine, despite the chaos brewing outside. Alex seemed better after a full night's sleep, though he kept touching his swollen cheek with confused fingers. He ate his breakfast quietly, occasionally asking about his broken car and when they would fix it. Maria had ordered 3 identical replacements online, paying for overnight shipping to minimize any disruption to his routine. By 9 a.m., her phone was ringing constantly. Reporters, producers, advocacy groups, lawyers offering their services. She let most calls go to voicemail, focusing on Alex's needs first. But when her phone rang with a number she recognized, she answered immediately. "Maria, I just saw your video." The voice belonged to David Kim, a civil rights attorney she had interviewed for her channel 6 months earlier. "I'm driving down from Seattle right now. Don't talk to anyone until I get there." The legal implications were becoming clear. This wasn't just about Patricia Whitmore's criminal charges, though those were proceeding through the system. This was about a pattern of discrimination, harassment, and abuse of power that could have federal civil rights implications. Patricia, meanwhile, was spending her first night in county jail. Her initial appearance before Judge Morrison had not gone well. The prosecutor had presented the security footage, medical photos of Alex's injuries, and statements from multiple witnesses. Despite her attorney's arguments about community leadership and good standing, Patricia was denied bail pending a psychological evaluation. "Your Honor," the prosecutor had argued, the defendant showed a shocking lack of remorse or understanding of the severity of her actions. She continues to maintain that she was justified in physically attacking a disabled child. This suggests a clear danger to the community if she's released. In her cell, Patricia stared at the concrete walls and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong. She had been protecting the neighborhood, maintaining standards, doing what HOA presidents were supposed to do. The fact that she had hit a child seemed like a minor detail compared to the larger issue of maintaining order. Her cellmate, a woman arrested on drug charges, had seen Maria's video on the jail's common room television. "You're that lady," she said with obvious disgust. "The one who beat up the little autistic kid. You're gonna have a real bad time in here." Patricia had never considered that there might be consequences beyond a simple fine or community service. The idea that she could be genuinely despised, that her actions could be seen as monstrous rather than merely overzealous, was a shock to her carefully constructed worldview. Back on Maple Drive, the media circus was intensifying. CNN had sent a crew. Local news stations were broadcasting live from the sidewalk where Alex had been attacked. Neighbors found themselves thrust into the spotlight. Their quiet suburban street, suddenly the center of a national conversation about disability rights and community power structures. Mrs. Henderson, who had captured the assault on her security camera, became an unlikely spokesperson for the neighborhood. Standing in front of her rose garden, she faced a bank of cameras and microphones with the poise of someone who had lived through 8 decades of American history. "I've been watching children play on this street for 40 years, she said, her voice steady and clear. "I've seen them grow up, graduate, get married, bring their own children back to visit. Alex Martinez is one of the sweetest souls I've ever known. What happened to him was not discipline or community enforcement. It was cruelty, pure and simple." The reporter pressed for more details. "Did you ever witness previous confrontations between Mrs. Whitmore and the Martinez family?" Mrs. Henderson's expression hardened. "Patricia Whitmore has been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. Most of us were too polite or too scared to speak up. She sent threatening letters, imposed ridiculous fines, made life miserable for anyone who didn't conform to her vision of suburban perfection. But attacking a child..." She shook her head sadly. "That crossed a line that can never be uncrossed." Meanwhile, Alex was trying to process the chaos around him with the limited understanding of a 7-year-old mind. He knew that many people were angry about the mean lady who had hurt him, but he didn't understand why strangers kept wanting to look at his bruises or ask him questions he couldn't answer. Maria shielded him as much as possible, keeping him inside during the heaviest media presence. But she also knew that his story had become larger than their family. The video had touched something deep in the American consciousness: outrage at the abuse of power, protective instincts toward vulnerable children, frustration with petty authoritarianism run amok. The comments on her video told the story of a nation awakening to the struggles of families dealing with autism and other disabilities. Parents shared their own stories of discrimination. Teachers wrote about the challenges of advocating for students with special needs. And adults with autism described their experiences of being judged and mistreated for behaviors they couldn't control. One comment particularly moved Maria. "My son is also autistic. Watching Alex get hurt for doing something completely harmless breaks my heart. Thank you for being brave enough to share this. Every parent of a special needs child needs to see that they're not alone in fighting for their kids' right to exist in the world." The momentum built rapidly. Autism advocacy organizations began coordinating a national day of protest. The hashtag #YourJusticeForAlex was joined by You Autism Rights and You End Hody-Ranny. Stories emerged from other communities where HOAs had targeted families with disabled members, using community standards as weapons of exclusion and harassment. Patricia's attorney, Richard Thornton, found himself representing the most hated person in America. His phone rang constantly with death threats meant for his client. His law practice's Yelp page was flooded with 1-star reviews. Even his wife suggested he consider withdrawing from the case. "I can't represent someone who hits children," she said over dinner, her voice tight with disgust. "It makes me sick to think about that little boy." Thornton stared at his untouched meal. In 30 years of practice, he had defended murderers, embezzlers, and drug dealers without his personal life being affected. But Patricia Whitmore's case was different. The video footage was clear, the witnesses were credible, and the victim was a disabled child. There was no plausible defense strategy beyond hoping for a lenient judge and a plea bargain. The Maple Grove HOA board held an emergency meeting 3 days after the assault. The 5 remaining members gathered in the community center, knowing they faced a public relations nightmare that could destroy property values and result in massive lawsuits. Board Secretary Janet Mills called the meeting to order, her hands shaking as she read from prepared notes. Given the recent events involving our president, Patricia Whitmore, the board needs to address the situation and chart a path forward. Treasurer Bob Hendricks looked around the nearly empty room. Only 2 residents had shown up, both elderly neighbors who seemed confused about why they were there. "Where is everyone we sent notice to the whole community?" "They're probably afraid to be associated with us," Mills replied honestly. "The Martinez video has made us all look like monsters." Vice President Sharon Cooley had been silent through most of the meeting, but finally spoke up. "Maybe because we've been acting like monsters. I've been on this board for 4 years, and I've watched Patricia terrorize our neighbors while we all sat back and let it happen." The uncomfortable truth hung in the air. They had all seen Patricia's increasingly aggressive enforcement tactics, her discriminatory treatment of families with children, her petty harassment of anyone who challenged her authority. But challenging her had seemed too difficult, too risky to their own standing in the community. "What do we do now?" Hendricks asked. "Our insurance company is already talking about dropping us. We could face wrongful death suits if anything happens to that boy. And the legal fees for defending Patricia could bankrupt the association." Mills shuffled her papers nervously. "I motion that we remove Patricia Whitmore from her position as president, effective immediately. All in favor?" 4 hands went up. The decision was unanimous, but it felt hollow too little, too late. Outside the community center, protesters had begun gathering. It started with just a few neighbors holding homemade signs reading "Justice for Alex" and "End HOA Abuse." But as word spread through social media, the crowd grew to include autism, rights activists, disability advocates, and concerned citizens from across the region. Maria hadn't organized the protest, but she felt compelled to address the crowd. Standing on the community center steps with Alex in her arms, she looked out at hundreds of faces united in support of her son. "3 days ago, my child was attacked for the crime of being different," she began, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "He was hurt by someone who saw his autism not as a neurological difference to be understood, but as a problem to be eliminated." The crowd was completely silent, hanging on every word. But Alex's story is not unique. Every day, children and adults with disabilities face discrimination, harassment, and worse. They're told they don't belong in schools, in neighborhoods, in communities that should welcome everyone. She held Alex a little closer, feeling his small arms tighten around her neck. He was overwhelmed by the crowd, but seemed to understand that these people were here to help him. "We demand justice for Alex, but we also demand something bigger. We demand a world where every child can spin their toy car on the sidewalk without fear, where humming and stimming and being different isn't treated as a threat to community standards, where homeowners associations protect residents instead of terrorizing them." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Signs waved in the air, cameras flashed, and the message spread even further across social media networks. Justice for Alex was now trending worldwide. Patricia watched the protest coverage from her jail cell, surrounded by women who made no effort to hide their disgust with her. The inmates had formed their own hierarchy of justice, and child abusers occupied the lowest rung. Patricia found herself isolated, threatened, and completely unable to understand why hitting one noisy child had caused such an uproar. Her attorney had explained the charges she faced: assault on a minor, child endangerment, and a federal civil rights violation for discriminating against a disabled person. The potential sentence could exceed 5 years in prison, not counting any civil lawsuits that might follow. "I was maintaining community standards," she insisted during their consultation. "That boy was disturbing the peace every single day. His parents refused to control him, so I had to take action." Thornton looked at his client with a mixture of professional obligation and personal revulsion. "Patricia, you hit a 7-year-old disabled child. You grabbed him hard enough to leave bruises. There is no community standard that justifies assaulting a child." But he was making noise every day, sitting there humming and carrying on. It was affecting property values, bothering the other residents. According to every witness statement I've read, no other resident was bothered by Alex's behavior. In fact, they all describe him as quiet and well-behaved. You were the only person who considered his autism symptoms to be a problem. Patricia fell silent, unable to articulate why a child's soft humming had triggered such rage in her. The truth was that Alex represented everything she couldn't control: the unpredictability of human difference, the messiness of real life that didn't fit into her rigid vision of suburban order. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court was conducted by Dr. Elena Vasquez, a forensic psychologist with extensive experience in cases involving violence against children. Her initial assessment of Patricia revealed a personality structure built around control, perfectionism, and deep-seated intolerance for anything that disrupted her sense of order. "Do you believe your actions were appropriate?" Dr. Vasquez asked during their first session. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in the plastic chair. "I was enforcing legitimate community regulations. The boy was creating a noise disturbance on a daily basis." According to decibel measurements taken by police, Alex's humming registered at approximately 45 decibels from a distance of 10 feet. That's quieter than normal conversation, and well within acceptable noise levels for residential areas. But it was constant, every day, the same irritating sounds. "Patricia, you struck a child. You physically attacked a 7-year-old boy with autism. Do you understand the severity of that action?" For the first time, Patricia's composure cracked slightly. I didn't mean to hurt him. I just wanted him to stop. To be normal." Dr. Vasquez made careful notes. Patricia's inability to empathize with Alex, or recognize the harm she had caused, suggested significant personality pathology. Her fixation on normalcy and community control bordered on obsessive, and her complete lack of remorse was deeply concerning. The media attention continued to intensify. National news programs featured Alex's story as part of broader discussions about disability rights and HOA overreach. Legal experts debated the implications of the case, while autism advocates organized support groups for families facing similar discrimination. Maria found herself thrust into a role she had never sought: spokesperson for a movement that was growing beyond anything she could have imagined. Her YouTube channel gained 2 million new subscribers in a week. Interview requests poured in from major networks, magazines, and podcasts. But her primary focus remained on Alex's recovery. The physical bruises were healing, but the emotional trauma ran deeper. He had become fearful of going outside, worried that the mean lady might return. His carefully constructed routines were disrupted, and his sense of safety in his own neighborhood had been shattered. Child psychologist Dr. Michael Chen worked with Alex twice a week, using play therapy and gentle conversation to help him process what had happened. Alex's limited vocabulary made traditional talk therapy challenging, but his emotional intelligence was high enough to understand that many people cared about him and wanted to keep him safe. Car Lady heard Alex, he told Dr. Chen during one session, referring to Patricia by her role as HOA president rather than her name. Yes, the car lady hurt you, Dr. Chen confirmed gently. But she was wrong to hurt you. You didn't do anything bad. Alex considered this carefully, spinning a therapy toy car across the table. Alex makes happy sounds. Car lady, no like happy sounds. The simple statement captured something profound about the case that legal experts and social commentators had struggled to articulate. Patricia had attacked a child for expressing joy in the only way he knew how. She had punished happiness itself, and in doing so, had revealed something dark about her own character and the culture of control she represented. 2 weeks after the assault, Patricia Whitmore's trial date was set for January 15th. The prosecution felt confident in their case video evidence, multiple witnesses, clear physical injuries, and a defendant who continued to insist she had done nothing wrong. Public opinion was overwhelmingly against her, making jury selection a significant challenge. The defense strategy focused on Patricia's mental state and her genuine belief that she was acting within her authority as HOA president. Thornton argued that years of unchecked power and community deference had created a distorted sense of responsibility that led to poor judgment rather than criminal intent. My client dedicated 8 years of her life to maintaining property values and community standards, he told reporters outside the courthouse. While her actions were clearly inappropriate, they stemmed from an overzealous commitment to her duties, rather than malicious intent to harm a child. The argument fell flat with most observers. Video of Patricia grabbing and shaking Alex, combined with her complete lack of remorse, painted a picture of someone who saw violence as an acceptable tool for enforcing her will. The fact that the victim was a disabled child made her actions even more reprehensible. As the legal process continued, the Maple Grove community was transforming. The HOA board had dissolved itself entirely, replaced by a resident council focused on genuine community building rather than rule enforcement. Property management companies reported that inquiries about living in Maple Grove had actually increased, with many families specifically attracted by the community's rejection of authoritarian governance. Mrs. Henderson organized weekly coffee gatherings in the community center, bringing neighbors together in ways that Patricia's rigid rules had never achieved. Children played more freely in yards and on sidewalks, their laughter replacing the tension that had pervaded the neighborhood for years. Alex began venturing outside again, though initially only with his mother close by. The new red car she had ordered was identical to his broken one, but it took time for him to trust that his routine was safe. Gradually, with encouragement from neighbors and the gentle presence of Mrs. Henderson's dog, he returned to his afternoon ritual. On the day, Patricia Whitmore was sentenced to 4 years in prison, plus mandatory anger management and psychological counseling. Alex was sitting on his favorite stretch of sidewalk, humming softly as his red car spun perfect circles in the afternoon sun. The sound carried across Maple Drive like a small victory, a declaration that joy and difference, and the simple right to exist, would not be silenced by fear or hatred. Maria watched from her porch, tears streaming down her face as she realized that her son, her beautiful, unique, perfectly himself, son, was healing. The bruises had faded, but more importantly, his trust in the world was slowly returning. He had learned that there were people who would hurt him for being different, but he had also learned that there were many more people who would stand up to protect him. The Justice for Alex movement had evolved into something larger, a national conversation about inclusion, acceptance, and the rights of people with disabilities to exist fully in their communities. Maria's YouTube channel became a resource for families navigating similar challenges, a place where difference was celebrated rather than feared. But on that quiet afternoon, watching her son reclaim his simple routine, Maria felt the deepest satisfaction of all. Alex was humming again, his voice soft and melodic and completely unashamed. He was spinning his car and finding joy in the repetition, the predictability, the gentle comfort of his own unique way of being in the world. And in that moment, surrounded by neighbors who had become true friends, and a community that had chosen love over fear, the sound of Alex's humming was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever heard. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Maple Drive, painting the sidewalk in warm golden light, where a 7-year-old boy continued to find wonder in the simple perfection of spinning wheels and the gentle music of his own voice. In a world that often demanded conformity, Alex Martinez remained beautifully, courageously himself, a reminder that true community is built not on rigid rules and arbitrary standards, but on the radical acceptance of every person's right to belong exactly as they are. And every day thereafter, as Alex hummed his quiet songs and spun his red car in perfect circles, the sound carried across the neighborhood like a promise that kindness would always triumph over cruelty, that love would always overcome hate, and that no amount of prejudice or power could silence the simple, essential human right to be different and be safe.